This is Jake Lawrence, and you're listening to the Jake Lawrence Podcast, an online weekly radio show dedicated to Chicago industry, technology, and thought leadership. And we certainly do have a thought leader in the field of nonprofit studies here today. Her name is Dr. Alicia Schatteman, and she is an associate professor for the Department of Public Administration and the Center for NGO Leadership and Development in the new School of Public and Global Affairs at Northern Illinois University in beautiful DeKalb, Illinois. And you can reach her at nonprofitscholar.com. And she really is a nonprofit scholar, the preeminent one, I think, in Illinois. So stay tuned for the next 45 minutes. I think you're really going to learn a lot from her about leadership, about school and academia, and about her thoughts on technology, and really a lot about how data influences nonprofits. And I think her story and her journey is a really important one to share, especially with aspiring nonprofit students in either bachelor or master degree programs right now. So again, nonprofitscholar.com. You can check out her blog, her research, her consulting practice, her resources, her bio, and all sorts of things. So yes, stay tuned. She is a wonderful person, and I hope you like her as much as I do. Okay, great. We are also sponsored by Corporate Suites Network, csnhousing.com. They are Chicago's premier short-term rental and corporate housing providers. Again, csnhousing.com. All things to do with month-to-month apartment rentals and furnished apartments. If you are a business manager and you are relocating staff or an employee to Chicago for 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 months for a special project, reach out to Corporate Suites Network, csnhousing.com first. If you lost your house in a terrible flood or a fire and you need 3 months to stay in a very nice apartment, totally furnished apartment with all the amenities, with housekeeping, they are your premier vendor as well. All right, I hope you will enjoy the podcast. Take care, guys. Hello, how are you, Dr. Alicia Schatteman?
I'm great. How are you, Jake?
Doing very well. I hear you are up in Canada right now.
I'm actually here in Illinois.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get to go anywhere. I'm on sabbatical this semester, but I'm here at NIU.
Oh, you are? You're still in DeKalb. Okay. For some reason, I thought you were in Canada.
No.
You are from originally Canada, right?
Yes, I am. Yes, out and about and all that. Yes.
Which province were you from?
Ottawa, Ontario, and I live just north of Ottawa, just near the nation's capital.
Okay, cool. And you are currently an NIU professor, correct?
Yes, I'm an associate professor. I've been here about 6.5 years.
Okay, and how in the world did you reach DeKalb, Illinois from Ottawa, Canada?
So I did a summer internship in Pennsylvania, Altoona, near Pittsburgh. And then my then boyfriend, now husband, was from New Jersey. And I met him actually when he was living in Ottawa. And then I moved to New Jersey, got married, went and did a PhD out there. And then I did a 1-year visiting professorship at John Jay College in New York City. And then I took the position here at NIU. And we all moved out here.
Wow. Okay, cool. And the department that you finally became tenured with is the Department of Public Administration. How did that correlate with your job experiences from Ottawa to New Jersey to Pennsylvania to now?
So I started my career wanting to work in government. My dream job was actually in the federal government in Canada. I was getting a master's degree in Canadian studies. And yes, you can get a master's degree in Canadian studies. So I was doing that when I met my husband, then boyfriend at the time. And so I was working in government. My first full-time job was working for a county level government in Ontario, which I then quit and took a summer job, which my parents were none too happy about, quitting the full-time job with pension benefits and all that stuff. But I was 24 maybe and said, so I'm just going to go. So when I moved to the U.S., after I did this summer internship, it was with a nonprofit organization doing marketing around heritage and historic sites, which was kind of what I was interested in when I was in Canada. Then I went to work at another county government in New Jersey. They had a cultural and heritage commission, and they operated several historic sites in central New Jersey. So I did that for a little while, which led me to working in a nonprofit, the New Jersey Historical Society, which was a nonprofit but did get some money from the state. And they operated a library, archives, museum. And I did their marketing and membership relations for a couple of years. And then when I was working there, I got a master's degree in communications management from Syracuse. And a job came up to run a small local historical society. It was 2 historic house museums. And I didn't know how to do that really, but I loved history and I was willing to learn and didn't need benefits, which I think was the attractive part of me, really. Because at the time I didn't need medical benefits and they weren't paying very much, which was fine also at the time. So I took that job and became executive director of 2 to 4 people, depending on the budget year, a bunch of volunteers, and we had like 6 historic structures. 2 of those were museums. The rest were either barns or our office building and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I learned there really about roofing and plumbing and electrical of old homes, and was learning a lot of American history, which I didn't really learn growing up. So I had to learn all that stuff. And then I did that for about 4.5 years. Working with volunteers is awesome and exhausting. And so nights and weekends were kind of not available. And then I was teaching on the side, thinking maybe I wanted to teach. So I did teach at Kane College. It's a small state college in New Jersey, teaching actually communications. And then said, yeah, I think I want to do this. So I quit that job and went full time to get my doctorate. That took me 3.5 years, so actually shorter than my undergrad. Finished that and then got into higher ed on a full-time basis.
What were the biggest challenges of running that small nonprofit in terms of the leaky roofs and the plumbing, combining with the marketing efforts and the volunteers? Did you ever experience, burnout from that in those 4.5 years?
Oh God, yeah, all the time. Luckily, I had a good board most times. I think working with a volunteer board is certainly a big challenge for small nonprofits. The other problem with that organization at the time was I was their first professional executive director for an organization that was founded in 1976.
Wow. Wow.
They were all volunteer until about 4 years before I got there. And their first staff person, I wouldn't really call it the executive director, but their first staff person was actually somebody they promoted from their volunteer corps. So they knew her. She was a friend, which means they didn't really respect her. And she didn't really have the training and background that they needed. So I was their first professional executive director. Was
that the impetus for getting a professional executive director because of that person?
Yeah, it was. Some of it was that they really thought that they had kind of hit a ceiling. They really couldn't grow the organization beyond her capabilities. And the board really didn't want to take a lot of direction from her because she didn't really have any training or background in nonprofit management. She was just a volunteer and knew how to run the place. I mean, she actually knew better than any of us what to do when the leaky roof. So yeah, I was their first paid person really, and I knew I was in kind of over my head when I walked in for my first kind of day or week on the job. And I walked into the office and it was an old Victorian, that was our office building. And my office was at the front, it was a beautiful building, had a fireplace. I was excited. But the board president had a desk in the same office facing me.
Facing you?
Oh, yeah. Like these 2 desks were butted up against each other.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so we kind of know who's been running the show. So we had to have that conversation. If I'm here and you want me to be the executive director, I don't share that responsibility with the board president. So the board president had to leave, and she was used to being there a lot. So that was kind of the first hurdle where I knew this was going to be a tough go. And the second was the volunteer corps. We had volunteers who were with the organization when it started in 1976, and this was 2001. So they were in their 40s in 1976.
Wow.
So
Okay.
if you do the math on that, they're in their 70s and 80s and still around, still working in the organization. So they weren't really keen on change.
Right.
So introducing change to an organization from an outsider, which is what I was.
A Canadian to boot.
A Canadian, no less. American history was like, okay, I guess I should know all this. So yeah, I was learning it as I went, almost. A lot of the American history anyway. So that was a transition, I would say. And we bumped heads. You know, I'm not going to lie, there was more than a few missteps. One of them that stands out in one of the houses, so the two historic house museums that we ran, one was from 1796 and one was from 1896. And I don't know, I know now a lot more about American history. At the time I did not, but I knew that the revolution was over in 1796.
Right.
That I did know, and yet they really wanted to interpret the house as being colonial era.
Oh, I see. And you had a problem with that characterization?
I did. We were not Williamsburg. If you wanted to ever go to Williamsburg, you should go. It's cool. And they really do first-person interpretation, like as if you are living and breathing in 1770. Cool. We were not. So getting that, because in 1976, I was a little kid. You weren't around. But at that time, because it was the bicentennial, there were a lot of people who were hyped up on American history and the revolution and independence and all that stuff, which is really cool. So a lot of these very small historical organizations started around that American patriotism stuff. And so they tried to translate that into a house that was built 20 years later.
Wow. Okay, so two things. I think that it's really important for professors, like in academia, to have some background information and to have some real work experience in the real world, especially if you're a nonprofit scholar. Having that deep work experience working in the nonprofit sector is highly important. So kudos to you. I think a lot of professors, don't have that work experience aspect. And the other thing is, what were the main takeaways from that experience moving forward into your career, and especially now? Like what do you take away from those experiences? Is it capital? Fundraising? Is it management? Is it volunteer management? Is it marketing? What is it?
Resources is primary. If you don't bring in resources through fundraising, through revenue generation, earned revenue, whatever, you won't be able to do the things that need to be done. You can't make a lot of changes if you don't have any money to do it. So I didn't really know I hadn't done a lot of firsthand fundraising myself in previous positions, so I had to figure that out. But I did, and then we got into operations of finances. So, who's in charge of the money? How's the board involved? What are our goals? Can we write grants? How many grants can we write? So, the resource stuff was actually the most important and critical for me to understand. Fund accounting, didn't have a clue what fund accounting was when I got into this. And when they said, we have 17 different funds and we're managing this. This one was restricted. This one is temporarily restricted. This one is permanently restricted. This one's unrestricted. Like all of that language is very foreign to me when I started, and you really have to have a good handle on the finances. And I think I did it as best as I could, as quickly as I could to get up to speed. And I had good treasurers, which was the other important piece. I had people who really knew the numbers. And we weren't talking large budgets either. I mean, this is an organization, an annual budget at our highest was probably $250,000. So it was not big. So I could learn relatively quickly with small amounts of money versus a very large organization. So it forces you, when you start your career in a smaller nonprofit, to really be everything and learn about everything. And then if you want to go on and specialize, I think that's great. But the smaller organizations, you actually get a lot more work experience than some of the big organizations.
So there's a lot of nonprofits in the United States, especially smaller nonprofits with operating budgets probably lower than $250,000. And there's probably 10 times more people in the United States that want to get into the nonprofit sector. And I feel like maybe their intentions are in the right spot, but they might not know what they're getting themselves into.
Mm-hmm.
Would you kind of comment on that a little bit?
Sure. I think that the sector as a whole is run on passion. And I didn't say this, but someone has said to me before that really all of the nonprofit sector is faith-based. They all believe it's just going to work out if they want it bad enough and if they think hard enough and pray on it and whatever. Like it's all faith. It's built on faith. And that's disconcerting because that's what kind of gives the nonprofit sector a bad name in some senses. It is a business. How we measure success is different than in the private sector. You have to run it like a business in that you have to know the management skills to do that. I think when someone says I'm really passionate about the nonprofit sector, I say, great, go volunteer. And if you can't volunteer, give money. And if you can't give money, and you have a great idea, sell it to another nonprofit and make it successful, that one that already exists. And if you've exhausted all of those things and you still think you want to run a nonprofit, then go take some classes and write a business plan. Because I think we have to go through more to get a house mortgage than we do to have to start a nonprofit. And that's just wrong. I think the barrier should be a little higher.
Do you think the United States needs more nonprofits?
No. I think we need more effective nonprofit organizations. We need to scale some of the nonprofits that we have. So the ones that are doing really well, we need to figure out how to bring it to scale. And I think that's the challenge. Many successful businesses are successful because they're able to scale. And there are very few nonprofits that get very large with national impact. And you can think of a handful. You can think of Girl Scouts and the YMCA and the Red Cross. Like, short of that,
right,
we don't have a lot of scalable nonprofits. So we have great small nonprofits that are maybe even regional, maybe even state, but very few that want to go beyond a state. Now, if you told a business, for-profit business, that your aspirations are you're going to serve one corner of one state, they would laugh at you. I mean, that would be insane. Why would you start a business that you would plan to keep small?
So, yes. So if you have all this passion and you want to start that no-kill animal shelter down the road, and you don't realize, though, that there's 10 other no-kill animal shelters in a 5-mile radius of you, there's sort of that disconnect. And the American dream a little bit is purely individual based and create your own business, create your own company. So I feel like that's kind of clashing with it as well. Where do you see the nonprofit? Is there a bubble approaching in the next 5-10 years? I mean, where's it heading in terms of direction?
I don't think there's a bubble. I think we're still going to see growth as population grows. We've been tracking pretty much with population growth. So as the country gets bigger, we've seen an increase in nonprofit organizations. And unfortunately, sometimes I think the IRS makes it easier. They're now doing when you file to become a nonprofit, there's like an EZ form now. So they're actually making it easier to create another nonprofit, which requires, like what you were saying, there's no gap analysis. There's no market analysis required. And your donors, really, all you need is a bunch of people who want to sit on your board, somebody who's willing to write some bylaws, and a little bit of startup funding, and you're a nonprofit. And then we don't have the same market that says, oh, we're just going to let the market decide, right? Like if you start a shoe store and you don't sell enough shoes, there's no market, so the store closes. Well, when we start a no-kill shelter, animal humane society, whatever, donors will give first out of their heart. So you just need to find enough people with the same vision or passion that you do, and you're up and running. Whether or not you actually change the world or even change the community and how that's measured becomes secondary. So that's the challenge in the nonprofit sector. We don't have a hammer that says, well, we're not being effective. Look, the bottom line says we're not being effective. We have other measures to measure those things, and donors will still give out of their heart. Like this has been tested in the research. If you look at nonprofits and the ones that you would say are ineffective, for example, they're losing money for a decade. They're actually in the red. They have no assets. They have all kinds of mortgages and liens. People still donate to them. The mission, they're drawn to the mission. And even if it's not a well-run organization, which is crazy at the same time, but those are the organizations that exist. I mean, Hull House that closed in Chicago a couple of years ago, they were in the red for decades. like
Wow.
decades. There were flags all over the place. The organizations that show up in the newspaper that they finally closed, that didn't happen because the last quarter was bad. That happened because the last decade was bad. Like it takes a really long time for someone to say, okay, I guess we need to do something.
Yeah, but many of these nonprofits wear that being in the red as a mark of pride, and there's some miscommunication, I think, with the donors that being in the black, having a surplus is sort of a bad thing, because why would you have a surplus if you're a nonprofit?
Yeah.
Isn't that
So
weird?
There's two kind of misconceptions, I think, when it comes to nonprofit finance. One is that, of course, you're a nonprofit, you shouldn't make any money, which is a fallacy. The IRS says make all the money you want, and we're not going to tax it. So seriously, make as much money as you want. It's not going to be taxed as long as it goes back into the organization. So if you have a surplus one year and that allows you to build up a savings so you have a cushion, or it allows you to make capital improvements, or it allows you to create an endowment, those are all very positive financial signals. So that's a good thing. The second thing, though, I think some boards take it to the other extreme. They hoard cash. So they'll actually be doing operationally okay, and they're sitting on actually too much reserves. They're sitting on a year. Now, this doesn't happen all the time, but they could be sitting to a year and a half of operating cash in savings because they're so scared that if they spend money, things are just going to, go very badly. So I've seen both extremes. I've seen no, we have to actually budget to zero, which is not a good idea. You should be budgeting to a surplus. We're going to budget to zero because we don't want to go one penny over, because then our donors think that we're not worthy, we're not needy enough. We don't need your money. Or we're going to bank all of this cash, and this is where the Wounded Warrior Project got into trouble last year. We're going to just stockpile cash. One, because we don't have capacity to actually do the programming, or two, we're just so scared that we might go out of business next year, so we're just going to keep all that in reserves. And neither case donors should like. What they should want some conservative financial responsibility, but they don't want you hoarding money for the sake of a rainy day. They actually want to know that their money is being spent, that you're having an impact with their donors. Otherwise, how can you possibly go out the next year and say, please give us money? I know we have a year and a half in the bank, but we really need it. It's not a compelling argument.
Now, I just want to highlight a little bit about your experience. Alicia knows a lot about nonprofits, and it isn't just because of her experience at the Heritage Museum. She's been doing rather intense research for a long time now, and as a tenured professor at NIU, and she's also doing a consulting business as well. Would you mind talking a little bit about consulting and how it's going and what your plans are for it?
So here at the university, there are three ways that we contribute to the community or society. And one is through research, which I love to do. And the other part is teaching, which is also a whole lot of fun. And the other part is service. And sometimes that service comes in where we donate our time or we give our time to a specific reason. So come and speak somewhere. Would you mind serving on this panel, or talk to a reporter or whatever? And that's all awesome.
Do a podcast.
Yeah, do a podcast. So that all falls under that service kind of umbrella. And that's kind of a one-off thing. There's not a lot of preparation. And it's just talking about experience, which is fine. And then other times an organization will say, hey, we're kind of at a critical juncture in our organization. We're either thinking about hiring our first staff person, or our executive director just left and she was here for 23 years, or we want to know if we should expand. So they come with kind of critical questions. That's a little bit more intense than having a chat over coffee about how you're doing. So then they'll say, and typically what I get asked to do is around strategic planning. It's that why in the road question, which way do we go? And so that means probably for 2 or 3 months, not full time. I'll come in and just have conversations with people. Sometimes it's good that my experience is not necessarily in their particular mission area. So health and human services. I have never worked myself in a health and human service organization. So counseling centers, homeless shelters, domestic violence programs, all of that stuff.
Do you think that's an advantage?
I do, because I really have no idea what they do on a day-to-day basis. I do know organizations and how they should be run, but I have no idea about their particular mission. So sometimes I can ask questions that they're like, oh, I didn't really know that. And they'll use particularly like terminology stuff, which we're notorious for using like shorthand. And so their mission statements could only really be read by a PhD in clinical psychology. And I'm like, what are you trying to say?
Alicia, can you tell me what your most favorite mission statement is and your least favorite mission statement is?
Oh, that's a good one. So probably my most favorite is, let's see, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And it goes something like this. You could look it up, but it's something like to inspire the creative genius in all of us.
That's beautiful. I like that.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, that's really, really clean, concise, and right to the point. Yeah.
Love it. You know why they do it? It's very inclusive. By the way, mission statements should not be written from the point of view of an organization. So you as an organization do not have to exist in perpetuity. So it's not what you're going to do for me. It's what I'm going to do for you. So I like that it's, that oriented around who they serve, which I think is awesome, and inclusive. I mean, it's not like if you're smart enough, you'll get something out of this. If you're old enough, you'll get something out of this. No, it's all of us, which is cool.
All of us, yeah.
That's probably my most favorite right now at the time, because I love mission statements. The worst mission statements, one of them is, and this was a couple years ago that I pulled this, so they could have changed it. I hope they have. The Guggenheim. Guggenheim. So they have a lot of very, very smart people working there. I'm sure there's a bunch of PhDs there. I'm sure they think a lot of what their mission is. They get a lot of international recognition for what they do. And it was, I can't really tell it to you because it was probably 5 sentences. And it had things in there that were words that there's no possible way Joe Schmo on the street would have any clue of what you do. And even if they did, they wouldn't see themselves in your mission.
Yeah.
It's collect, preserve, protect, which all the cultural organizations, that's what their mission statements start with. Collect, preserve, protect, exhibit, display, promote. That's all the verbs that they can find, they'll put in there. And then it'll use, dynamic curatorial practices.
Wow. Okay. So I got it up right now. I'm going to read it. Committed to innovation, the Guggenheim Foundation collects, preserves, and interprets modern and contemporary art and explores ideas across cultures through dynamic curatorial and educational initiatives and collaborations. With its constellation of architecturally and culturally distinct museums, exhibitions, publications, and digital platforms. Geez, wow. Okay, the foundation engages both local and global audiences.
You're going to need oxygen to get to the end.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
Those are the extremes. The Science and Industry Museum and the Guggenheim.
And okay, so I
want to go. Yeah.
Yeah. The bigger question though is like, why does it even matter, Alicia?
Well, because your mission statement really is your only purpose for existing. This is the only thing that the IRS cares about when they give you your nonprofit status, which means all of us taxpayer folks subsidize every single nonprofit that exists in the United States, whether you give them a penny or not. So again, let that sink in for a second, because regardless of if you support these organizations yourself, if it is Save the Dolphins of Miami, Inc., whatever, and they bring in $2 million a year, which they don't pay taxes on, and they have a building, which they don't pay property taxes on, and they have sales, which they then don't have to pay taxes on. Somebody else is picking up that revenue, and that's everybody else. Your mission is what you've said you're doing for society so that every other American taxpayer, business, individual supports. That mission is critical. So that's the first part. The second part is just by that mission, that's how you attract support. Like, I already feel like I need a PhD in art history to go to the Guggenheim.
Right.
They make me feel really stupid. Whereas science and industry, I'm like, I could get something out of that. Maybe I'm not that creative.
I feel inspired. Wow.
You just called me a genius. Like, that's pretty cool. I don't know what the hell dynamic curatorial whatever.
Yes.
I don't know what that means.
A constellation of architecture and cultural collaborations. Exactly.
Oh my God, that's mission by committee. Like, it's so bad. Tell me your audiences are, regionally, nationally, and globally. There's no one you actually left out.
So were you thinking about this stuff back at the Heritage Museum
A little bit.
Yeah.
And that's probably why I decided to do my PhD, because some of the things just really bugged me. The practices bothered me.
Mhm.
And people would talk about best practices. People use those words. Best practices to me means we're kind of recycling everybody else's efforts, and it worked for somebody else, therefore it should work for me. Best practices really should be research focused, or at least tested within your context. So if we have this great mission statement that works in Southern California, that doesn't mean it's going to work in where I was, Montclair, New Jersey. So I really wanted to figure out what do we mean when we say best practices for fundraising? What do we mean when we say best practices for strategic planning? So I started reading a lot, going to as many workshops, conferences as I could to really educate me, because when you work in smaller nonprofits, your network of individuals is very small. You're talking to the other 6 museums that are kind of near you that kind of do what you do. So you're relying on experts of 6. Like it's not really an expert panel. Those are just people I had access to. And so the research at the time was really research by convenience, what I could get from the people that I could connect with. And so I really wanted to figure out, is that really what we should be doing?
That's interesting. And I don't really think that is just exclusive to the nonprofit sector. I think small businesses go through that. And I think small, public agencies do as well. I think I have experience with that. Jake, talk to the 5 comparable, municipalities and tell us what they're doing. And then we'll just do the exact same thing that they're doing. So,
like those words, don't reinvent the wheel. Sometimes we should reinvent it.
Or just look at the context of the wheel structure itself and look at the texture of the wheel. So it actually applies to your situation and applies to your organization.
Yep. And now I have the luxury of time, because when you're a nonprofit, just when you work at any smaller nonprofit or any not smaller organization, could you do that by 4:00? No. Like if I'm going to do a research project, I'm going to spend a month to 2 months just doing background reading and literature and to figure out what we know about this particular issue. And then I'm going to design a research study that could take 3 to 6 months, et cetera, et cetera. So practitioners, that's the downside, is I understand their frustration, that's how they do their shorthand, go to the people that and ask them what they're doing, because they don't have the luxury of time.
Boards of trustees in municipal governments, they look at those timelines and they're going to balk at you. They're going to be like, 9 months to do this. Are you kidding me? We're going to pay you for 9 months to do this. Yeah,
and then you can go do a Google search and get 7,000 hits and tell you, the proper way you should wash your car. I mean, you can go find that out pretty quickly. But if you want to have a more, how should we engage the citizenry when we're trying to put through a referendum that will expand our park district by 50%? I think you should spend a little more time to come up with a better plan to do that, rather than the shorthand that a lot of smaller organizations do. So it takes a leader to recognize why you maybe need to spend more upfront time.
Were you thinking about data back at the Heritage Museum, and were you or were you not?
I was, because I walked in where everything was paper-based.
Okay. What year was this, by the way?
So I started there in 2001 and I left in 2005.
Oh, okay, cool. All right.
So we had people that had data, and we had computers, and we had all that stuff. So this was not pre-internet or anything. I mean, we had lots of access to resources. What we didn't have was capacity of what to do with it. So if you want to know who donated to the annual appeal for the previous year, there was a box that said annual appeal 1998. And in that box, you would find response cards for all the mail, because that was the only way they got annual appeals at the time, was you filled out a card, which was mailed with your check, and then it went into the box marked annual appeal. So that was our data. That was our data for who gave and how much. You would go through the box. When we did get a small grant to move our collections. So in museums, your collections are just itemized list of everything that you own. And in this new software that we got, it actually did have an add-on feature that you could enter donor records. And that's when we started taking the boxes and entering those into the database, and then transitioning with new records into the database. So we started to build that, but we were starting from zero.
Right. So how do you think about data now compared to back in 2000?
I still think there are capacity issues like I did then. You need people who are willing. First part is the willingness to actually have the data, look at the data, and make decisions based on the data, not on gut. And if you can't get over that, no sophisticated software system will help you. You have to have the buy-in to say, you know what, we really want to know how we're doing, why we're doing it, and to be working more efficiently. And if you can't get that buy-in, then you don't bother spending a whole bunch of money on software and hardware. It's not going to get you there.
Yeah,
if you get over that hurdle, then you can move.
I thought it was like all faith-based, and now you're telling me that it needs to be dispassionate, right?
No. But then the other part with nonprofits is it is humbling to realize how small of an effect you have. And that's hard to say, right? We're spending millions of dollars every year. We have about 1.7 million nonprofits who bring in billions of dollars. At last count, it was $300 billion, whatever it was, that's moving money around to help people. So shouldn't we have better outcomes? Shouldn't we now have less homelessness, better educational achievements, all of that kind of stuff? And it turns out not so much. We may be making a dent, or we may actually just be preventing slides, which is good in and of itself, but we're not making huge gains. And it's because we are interacting with people and not plants and not soil and all those kinds of things which you can manipulate. But people don't like to change, even good habits. Bad habits are really hard to change. So if I said, Jake, I know you like coffee, right? You like coffee.
I love coffee.
Yeah. So Jake, I want you to quit coffee, like cold turkey.
Ooh.
That would be bad, right?
I might get a caffeine withdrawal, and I might get a caffeine hangover.
Like there'd have to be some big incentives. And tell you that, in 15 years this could be harmful to you is not really going to do it.
Right. I see where you're going with this.
So if we want to change that, not from just like stopping, even reducing your coffee intake or stopping coffee intake completely, if you want to transition that to more serious social issues, whether that's domestic violence, drug addiction, whatever it is, it's not like a one shot in the arm kind of thing. Us doing weekend programming once a month at the high school, or showing videos, or doing a health fair, which is my favorite thing in the world. Do another health fair that we're going to then say has some kind of impact on obesity. No. People don't change, and it's very hard to change really ingrained habits and mindsets and attitudes. Those are very, very difficult to change. And that results in lots of other, society problems that we're dealing with. So it's not a simple thing. And I think nonprofits have to be humble in their expectations, be honest with donors. And sometimes it's easier if you don't have all that data. Because then you're just saying we're doing good because we're doing good, and doing good is a good thing. And doing good is not necessarily a good thing all the time.
Okay. Tell me about outcomes a little bit more. Tell me how data and technology influences outcomes, and then tell me how your research is looking into those things.
So we're pretty good. I won't say great. I'll say we're pretty good at tracking outputs in the nonprofit sector. So if you read a press release or look at an annual report, which is pretty much a marketing document, so you'll see things in there like we served 250 people last year. We delivered 700 meals. We handed out 500 pounds of food. So those are all outputs, fairly easy to measure. They're not too taxing on the organization. They make you feel kind of good because it's a measure of your activities at the end or the conclusion of whatever you've done. So those are good. And we need to do output measures. We actually need to know that data. That's good. Some organizations are looking at the so what. So you handed out 500 pounds of food. So what?
And
your
these are
right? It has to tie back to your mission. Is your mission to hand out free food?
No. It's to reduce.
Your mission is to decrease hunger.
And so they're lacking the outcome part of the equation.
Yes. Now it is absolutely a challenge, no lie, because it's much easier to track outputs. And I'll give an example. There was and this isn't from an organization that's around here. It was actually a textbook example, a sexual assault, domestic violence agency. And they were doing a lot of outreach to women who were being sexually abused, or it was a domestic violence situation. And so they were doing workshops, and the women, they expressed, which is my other favorite thing, doing satisfaction surveys. How happy are you with us? Not very effective outcome measures, by the way. It just tells you how happy you are about a certain thing on a certain date. But they were doing satisfaction surveys like, how much do you like the program? Do you feel like the instructor is warm and friendly? Do you feel like the room is the right location? Whatever. So they're doing those things. And they said, oh, we're doing great work. Love it. And the other thing is, well, we served 50 people this year. Last year, we served 30. So isn't that great? Like, we served 20 more people. And they went out to their funders and all of those things. And so somewhere along the line, the funders like asking, which everybody should ask, so what? So what? And they said, no, we served 50 people. And they're like, okay, well, tell us how many women in your community actually experience domestic violence. Like, what's the baseline? Is it 50? You're doing a great job. You're actually serving all of them. Is it 10,000? Then you're making a very, very small dent. The other part of the question they asked was, so what? Like, how are these women's lives different? How have something changed? What's going on? Have their attitudes, knowledge changed? And how is their home life, right? You're trying to influence something that happens inside of a home that you don't know anything about. And so they said, oh, well, we should ask them those kinds of questions, not just the satisfaction surveys. And they did. And what they got back was, when they asked them, to what extent domestic violence has occurred in your house, when they started asking those kinds of questions, throughout the program, domestic violence was going up.
Oh, geez.
You got to stab why that might be the case?
No, why?
So if you're talking to women and telling women and informing women that they should not be abused, that they deserve more, that they should stand up for themselves, what happens when that woman goes home?
They bring that attitude to the household, and it's a negative response to the man, I'm assuming.
You are correct.
Yeah.
So this woman who didn't question, didn't, come at me with saying, no, I don't deserve this. I'm better than this. You have to stop this. Mm-hmm. Violence goes up. And so when you think about a program like that, their outputs looked, that they were increasing with no real baseline, but they were going up number of people that they served. But if they were tracking outcomes, they were actually doing a detriment to those women. Their women were actually in more harm.
It's so incredible to think that
I know.
There's many nonprofits out there that are probably doing the exact same thing. Their heart is in the right place, and they're simply not looking at the right data.
Yep.
And that's unfortunate. How do you think technology can improve that, though?
Well, it can improve it on every aspect. Again, I think it does come down to the data culture of the organization. So there are going to be generational differences in leadership with volunteers, with their comfort levels of data, using the data themselves. Like, I really don't think the brand new intern who's 21 years old coming into their first position should handle all the data and the website and all the social media. Right? That tends to be what happens.
Isn't that what happens?
I know. And so you're putting the most inexperienced person in front of all the data with no decision-making authority.
Yeah, that's incredible. What are your research interests, though? And are they related to this?
They are. So I've been working with a local mental health board, and there's 100 and whatever counties in Illinois. Not all of them have mental health boards. They're by referendum, you can create a mental health board. And what that means is a portion of property taxes is dedicated to individuals with disabilities and behavioral mental health, which is cool. It's a form of taxation that filters right back into the community to focus on those issues. So I'm working with the local DeKalb County mental health board, and they started asking organizations for outcomes because we're thinking, hey, outcomes are probably a good idea,
right?
So we should start to ask those, and so that sentiment is not a bad sentiment. We should be looking as a funder, maybe asking the organizations that we fund to come up with outcomes. But then there's the disconnect. So one, does the organization track outcomes? Do they want to track outcomes? What kinds of data do they have? Do they have capacity, either human resources or technology, to actually support collecting that data, analyzing that data, and reporting on that data? So they actually hired me as a consultant and I'm still kind of working with them to assess these organizations. They fund about 16 organizations. Go in and ask them about their data use and about just data, because sometimes outcomes and all that stuff gets a little bit, too much language. So sometimes I just say, like, what information do you collect, and who do you collect it from, and what do you do with it? And so nonprofits, because they run lean, unfortunately, they think that donors will punish them for having administrative costs. Mm-hmm. And that whole overhead thing, which is awful. They really think they're going to be punished, which means there's nobody to do data. There's like this, we get 5 hours from the office manager. We get 2 hours from this department head because he knows this database, and we get 3 hours. So nobody's actually in charge of the data in these small and medium-sized nonprofits. So I went in, did a survey, did a couple of workshops, then did a case study of 3 organizations that received funding from this organization over a period of 10 years. And ask them questions like, again, this is not my area of expertise in terms of the content, the actual service delivery. I have no idea what you guys do. Like, I have no idea. But tell me what data and information you collect from the people that you serve. How do you get it? What do you do with it? So I did that for 3 organizations and reported back to the mental health board. And I said, so what's happening in these organizations, you're asking them for data that they can't collect or don't collect or don't have the capacity to collect.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of a good one. One of the things they want to know is people that come get services, say at a youth service bureau, and they're 16 or 17 years old, and they stop and start. So they started a program, they come for 3 weeks, and then you don't see them for 3 months. And then something happens to them in their lives or whatever, and then they come back for 3 months. And so the mental health board is like, well, that's kind of weird. I wonder what's going on. They're 16 years old and they don't live at home and they're sleeping on their friend's couch. Like, we study people, so it's really hard to track individuals, particularly minors, and particularly people that don't live at home, where they might have guardians or not, and even to keep up with them is hard. So there's lots of layers of issues when you're actually trying to track a population that's kind of untrackable in many circumstances. The other issue I would say is when they're trying to do this outcome data I said the capacity in the organization, so it's not really any one person's responsibility, and it's a mismatch with the type of funding they're offering. So mental health board, they want to make sure that you live in the county, for example. Okay, that's kind of an easy one, because not everybody stays at the same address 12 months a year, but they want to make sure they're a county resident. That's great. And the second thing, when they're interested in county funding, they want to make sure you don't have any other resources, like none. So if you already have insurance, then you're not going to get county funding, for example.
Right.
So you're predetermining the population. Now, the people that have no insurance, don't qualify for Medicare or Medicaid, and don't have any individual wealth, you can imagine if you could put a picture in your head of what that person might be. If you're going to track the outcomes of that person, I can kind of tell you what they are, right? You don't really need to collect a lot of data. This individual probably has not had the best support systems, probably does not have high education, probably does not, et cetera, right?
Right.
Are we really tracking incomes on those individuals because you kind of know where that is? Or is the purpose of government funding just to provide that access, which they otherwise would not have?
I feel like data collection of any organization needs to be kind of outlined at the very beginning of the organization's inception through like a strategic planning process or something. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be certain processes really culturally instilled within the organization. And I don't think that's a technology issue, Alicia.
No, I absolutely think it is an organizational culture issue. Do you want to know how you're doing and capture evidence to tell you how you're doing on a regular basis and then use that data to support decision making? If you don't collect any data. And the other part I think with nonprofits run into is that even if you have a very knowledgeable executive director, board members that say, yep, we want to know how we're doing. Let's start tracking this. Let's start doing this. And they do a really good job of creating an internal infrastructure. They have all kinds of software. They actually have even a part-time kind of data analyst person. They're doing all the things right. And then they have a funder, like either a foundation or a government, that says, that's great, but can you also track all of these 12 things that we want you to do on top of what you're already doing and report it in this way on, every 65 days in an Excel spreadsheet? And they're like, well, but we're doing all of this stuff. I know you're doing all that, but can you do all of this just for us?
So a lot of these organizations are trying to get grant funding, so they are looking for these donors, and the requirements from these donors often outweigh the capacity and resources of these nonprofits then.
Yeah, one of the first, I would say, mistakes or learning experiences that I had at the Historical Society was actually pursuing grant funding.
Okay.
Grant funding to me should be very strategic. If it leverages individual donations, certainly pursue it, but weigh the cost of managing the grant and the reporting requirement for the grant before you apply. Because what you end up doing is, I got a small grant, and it came initially from HUD at the federal government, but then it all rolls through the state and the county and whatever else. So by the time it got to me, it was a very small grant, and it took me hours and hours to report on this grant. At the time, we were photocopying checks left, right, and center. We were making photocopies of invoices. I mean, a small amount, like a couple $1,000s. And I had to do a separate survey of all the people who came to this particular program because it was partly subsidized by this grant. I'm like, oh my gosh, I am never, ever doing this again. So you have to weigh all of that reporting requirements and include those costs when you think about, what's this grant going to mean? This grant means, yes, you get $5,000 for your program, but if it costs you $3,000 in staff time to administer it, don't do it. But you have to have that ability. You have to have that quantitative lens to look at your direct and indirect costs to make sure it's worthwhile.
So I'm hearing that a lot of these nonprofits, small, medium, maybe even large, they have a lack of strategic leadership in terms of data and technology, and it doesn't sound like it's very good news. So I think a lot of people that are listening to this might find this information and what you're saying to be a little challenging and kind of contrary to what they're thinking and what their general conception is of nonprofits. So what's the silver lining in this?
I'm totally optimistic of the organization because, because we need them. The society needs functioning nonprofit organizations to do the good work. So we need doers to support communities. Otherwise, our communities would look very different without the work of the nonprofit in every community. So all of your soccer leagues could be gone. All of your social civic groups would be gone. I mean, we can't, those are not communities we want to live in. So we need them to support the communities that we love. And that includes the arts, that includes health and human services. That's all done by nonprofits. What's also, I guess, more optimistic for me is that the sector as a whole is professionalizing. So we're moving away from the charity mindset, doing good work just to do good work. And I still think we need some of that. That's why a lot of the faith-based organizations do charitable works. We need people to hand out soup on Wednesday afternoons. We need those folks. But if we really want to address the big issues of poverty or homelessness or whatever, we also need nonprofits who could be much more strategic. And to run those nonprofits, we need people who are drawn to the sector to make it a career, not a hobby. We need people who want to invest in their educations, lifelong, likely, not just a degree, but to continue to grow and learn throughout their careers and draw them into the nonprofit sector.
How do you do that?
Tough.
How do you do that?
Tough because we still have a mindset where, it's charities. They don't earn anything. They don't make any money. Mm-hmm. Their salaries or whatever. So it is an educational process that needs to happen with donors to recognize that if you want an organization to be using the highest level of data collection like they do at Amazon or at any of the private sector companies, that takes an investment of dollars and people. And you want those best people, right? You want the people who have master's degrees to be running these organizations, because isn't poverty and homelessness just as important as where you buy shoes and how you can eat at a restaurant? I mean, we really need good people at the helm of these organizations. These are big issues. So we have to invest in those good people. And I hope they're being drawn into the sector. For our program and other programs across the country, we've grown just university programs offering courses in how to run these things within the last 20 years exponentially. So students are drawn into this work as a career, not as an interest or something you do when you get retired or when you need a part-time job, or like they are making careers, and we have national associations of fundraisers. And so I think the sector is professionalizing, which means we'll eventually get to a place where we have very professional staff running these organizations. But we are definitely in a transition where organizations that were started on faith and a little bit of money have to figure out, what do we want to do long term? Do we want to just continue to serve on a charitable kind of model, or do we want to really invest and grow, and we need to bring talent then into the organization?
I do think that you're right. It is professionalizing. I'm one of the people that was into a program like that. And rather than going full force into nonprofit management, I was persuaded to the dark side into public management. So I understand that it is a hard communications and marketing problem to get these people that are, focused on career-wise, that are talented in terms of technology and in terms of wanting to do the data and wanting to do it as a career. So I think it does take a certain type of motivation from someone. It takes a certain type of person. And where do you find that motivation to continue in this,
space.
in this space as a nonprofit scholar, because is it just something that you were born with, or did you grow up in a certain location? Kind of talk about that.
Yeah. I think I've always been community minded in that, but I was usually on the other side of this thing. So I grew up in a single mother household, one brother, shared a room with him begrudgingly because we only had a 2-bedroom apartment till I was like 13.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was not pretty. And it was probably an 800 square foot apartment. It was tiny. And a lot of opportunities that I got, and a lot of the benefits that I got, were purely because somebody else gave them to me. I mean, I would not have had things. So I'm Catholic, not that that's totally something you have to know, but I was offered the ability to go to a summer camp through the Boys and Girls Club, and it was a Lutheran summer camp. And I was the best Lutheran you ever saw for 7 days because they allowed me to go to summer camp. I was like, of course, I'll be Lutheran. I think that's a great idea. I'll be whatever you want if I get to go to summer camp. And so that was the only time I got to go to summer camp, is because our local Boys and Girls Club sponsored me. So they played a big role, I would say, growing up. And it wasn't just Boys and Girls Clubs. I mean, there was teachers and other civics clubs and Kiwanis, and all of those folks really helped us out. We were in public housing. I mean, that's a government subsidized program. I'm sure, subsidized to play baseball or whatever I was into. There were always opportunities for kids who couldn't afford it, that, somehow you would be able to afford it, that kind of stuff. We were always given things, hand-me-down clothing, whatever, from somebody. So I think because I got so much support as a kid, and saw the good work that just everyday individuals can play in really improving lives, I never really was drawn to the private sector. I had maybe a couple of part-time jobs, but for the most part, it was always in the government and nonprofit sector. I really thought that that's really what makes communities strong, is the work of those two organizations. And I wasn't sure if I was going to go public or nonprofit, and I've dabbled, I would say, in both. They both have advantages and disadvantages. We don't have the political side in the nonprofit world. Not that everything is not political, because sometimes it is, but governing in public versus governing in private is very different. So board meetings, are basically private. They're not publicized. I mean, if you're a member, you could go, that kind of thing. So that brings us a distinction, I think, between the two. I also think it's useful to know both. I mean, when I was writing government grants, I kind of knew how government worked, and I knew the process. And if they said cross the T this way and make sure it's on page 6, well, you better do it because they're not joking. Like, it has to be done a certain way. There's a certain standard. So it was helpful to understand both. And that's why I like our MPA program, that we hopefully expose students to both sides, whether you decide to build your career in one or the other. And personally, I think many millennials are kind of sector agnostic. It's really the cause they want to work on.
Right.
And I've seen students go from public to nonprofit to private, and they're still working in housing.
Right.
They're still working in education. Doesn't really matter.
Well, I think there's still hope for me personally. I may be weaving in and out of the sectors as I advance my career.
It can be where you build your career, or you do it in other ways, that you build bridges between the government sector who thinks that everything is run like government. It's not. So you're building bridges across, and that's just as important as building your career.
That's good. Part of the podcast is kind of talking about emerging technologies. And for the last couple of podcasts, I've kind of, given this question. In the next, 5 to 10 years, there's going to be emerging technologies that are going to disrupt a lot of industries. Whether or not that's artificial intelligence, that's virtual reality, that's autonomous cars, whatever it is. Where do you think that disruption is going to kind of like fall into the nonprofit sector?
I think there's a lot of opportunity around serving individuals, keeping particularly folks that have some disabilities or elderly individuals in their home with virtual assistants. I think that's kind of cool. The self-driving car, it'd be really awesome if my mother had that right now, because she's always complaining she can't get places. She still drives, thank God, because she's 14 hours away. So I can't drive her, but it really allows her to keep her independence if she can just run out and get something or get to a doctor's appointment without having to beg people to go, or because she has a car, but not to be able to have to pay for all of that stuff all the time, because it's much more expensive, even if you're using private transportation, taxis or whatever. So I think there's a lot of opportunity as we age to take care of a population that really wants to maintain independence. And yet not have to rely on family members who likely are dispersed across the country or around the world or whatever. So I think that's pretty cool. I can see lots of opportunities that way. As the baby boomers age, they're going to require and demand more services and more innovation to make sure that they maintain that independence. So that's pretty exciting for me, I think. I'm trying to think of other kind of that's probably a big one. I don't know if there's other big ones coming. If I could predict, I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, I think humans are really bad at predicting the future. So I think that's good enough. I had on Ronald Lands yesterday, and he was he's the executive director of a $40 million Navy museum in North Chicago.
Wow.
And, so he's kind of like half in with the Defense Department kind of people, and he was telling me the implications of AI and virtual reality in that sector. So I'm really glad that I'm hearing all these new things from different perspectives. And so I think that's kind of cool for the audience too. I think the nonprofit sector is going to be revolutionized, especially in the data technology realm with AI. I think it's going to become increasingly more easy, and it's going to require less capacity and less resources to kind of reach those data-driven decision-making types of things that we were talking about earlier. So maybe all we need then is just better planning. So better strategic planning.
And it's, just like with technology, planning is really a disciplinary document. It's just like budgeting. And for people that have personal budgets and say, okay, I'm only going to spend so much money on clothes this week, and then you just go out and buy a $200 pair of shoes. Strategic plans are just a piece of paper, or document, or a report. There's nothing tying you. The government says you don't have to have one. Even your funders don't even read them. Usually they ask, do you have one? Yes or no. They don't even say, do you follow them? When did you look at it? When did you evaluate it last? So the better organizations will really live their plans. They'll make sure that it is front and center. When I do a plan with them, I recommend strongly that they look at their strategic plan as often as they look at their bank accounts and check balances. If you do it that often, you're going to be fine. If you pull it out once a year and go, oh yeah, didn't we do that last year? And didn't we say we were going to do, what did we say we were going to do again? Then don't bother. Like, don't pay me or anybody else to write one.
That's a great point, especially because I think doing the strategic planning process is, it's obviously, labor intensive, but it's easy to do and it's easy to get done. But the implementation and the execution part of that process is definitely the hardest. And does your consulting practice talk about that, or is it in that space yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I tell them, the strategic planning process, when you're doing the data collection part, going out and talking to people and getting their opinions, that's really just a chance to listen. And organizations don't, push the pause button enough just to listen to people, whether that's your staff, your volunteers, your donors, whatever. And as an outsider, they sometimes will tell me things they won't tell the organization. And that's why it's better to bring in somebody from the outside, whoever that is. Just someone who's not connected. And I tell them up front, I don't have to implement this plan. I can write you one that is just glowing and makes you do all of these things, but I'm not the one that has to do the work. So we have to be really honest with what's possible and what you guys want to do and what you're hearing. So the front part, all the data collection part, is really just to create a conversation that you hope will continue. The actual planning, the actual plan itself, and that could be, which I say, don't create 27 goals with a staff of 3. And that's sometimes they want to do that. So it's kind of like talking a student into the right size research project. You have to right size a strategic plan. If you have a staff of 42 and you have legal on retainer and you have a marketing department, like, that's a strategic plan. That's robust. But if you're a staff of 4 and $125,000 budget and you have 6 board members and you're working out of somebody's basement, don't write a strategic plan that you can't actually implement. So sometimes I will teach them how to right size a plan. Make sure it's a plan that you can handle and manage yourself. And it doesn't have to be the end all and be all. It should be a working document. So if something happens and life disrupts, sometimes without us being able to foresee it, whether that's an economic disruption or, your major foundation, like I know Caterpillar is moving out of Peoria, I think.
Yes, sir.
And I'm guessing, I know a lot of nonprofits in the Peoria area rely on Caterpillar funding, either sponsorships or foundation. They have no control over if Caterpillar leaves Peoria tomorrow. So they should have been thinking, where are we most susceptible? And sometimes organizations can predict that and sometimes they can't. So your plan really has to be a working document. It should be looked at enough to say, ooh, this isn't going the way we thought. We have to make some realignments. That should not be a sin. You should do that if you need to do that along the way.
A living, breathing document. The strategic plan.
Right? This is what we hoped we would accomplish. You know what? That didn't work out. And how are we going to readjust? You can't just throw it away and say, okay, now we're just, going rogue and we're going to make stuff up. How can we readjust the plan to get back on track to what's actually happening?
That requires a lot of humility involved. And
a lot of humility. And you know what? Any sector has those folks where their egos are tied up in this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to say, especially around founding organizations with the founding person sitting across from you, that you need to stop doing this. And if he or she asks to do that again, you have to say no.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing that all founders have no egos at all.
Yeah, if you do have a large ego, I would say go start a business. Put your name on the marquee, put your name CEO on your business card, give it to your kids, whatever else you want to do. Nonprofits, your name really should be in very, very small print at the bottom, because you really want to create nonprofits that outlive you and your time. You're only, and I tell boards all the time, you're a steward of an organization. I owned a house that was over 100 years old. I never built it. I'm not going to outlive this house likely if we take care of it. So I'm a steward for a certain amount of time. And if boards and leaders look at themselves like that they're just stewards, do the best job that you can, strengthen it, grow it, whatever you can to hand it off to the next group of stewards, then you're in the right mindset.
Powerful, Alicia, powerful. I think you're a unique and engaging voice in a kind of a conversation that most people never get to have.
I know, it's so much fun. Thank goodness somebody wants to talk to me, right? I just love this stuff.
I think everyone can tell that you love it too. I think the passion just oozes out of your voice. So I think we're gonna wrap up, but I do this with every podcast. I'm gonna tell you that you have been transported to a lonely island, just you. And you can only bring a couple different items. So we're gonna go through the list. Which book, and only one book, would you bring to that lonely island?
Oh, that's so hard. I would probably bring Hemingway's, like a collection of stories.
Oh, wow. I did not expect that from you.
Yeah.
Any like nonprofit book that you would recommend?
Well, at the moment, I was just reading Beth Cantor's new book because I think it's really important for the sector to think about. We're such caregivers, people who work in the nonprofit sector. They're overworked, underpaid. It's all about the mission. And when you show up the next day after a week off, you get more work to do. That's part of the reason I got out of the sector, because the more successful you are, the more work you actually get instead of the other way around. So this Beth Cantor's book is all about kind of the health of people who work in the sector and how we need to do more self-care. And it's not just about the people that we serve. We can do a better job when we're healthier, stronger, and take care of ourselves.
Is it called Burnt Out?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have it on my desk.
I'll link to it. I'll link to it at the end. Don't worry.
And the other one is Mission Control. It's by Leanna Downey.
Okay.
And it's a little bit about the kind of debate on impact and being humble around your mission. So when I mentioned the Guggenheim, that is not humility. That is the opposite of humility. When you write mission statements that you're going to be everything for everyone, everywhere, and it's all going to be affordable, I don't believe you.
Okay. One book I'll throw out there is it's called Uncharitable by Dan Pallotta. He has a TED Talk as well that I'll link to. Okay, cool. And what musical record or music album that you would bring to this lonely island?
I really like, this is probably not a shock, a lot of Canadian bands, and there's...
Nickelback.
Nickelback's kind of cool. Drake, which I don't really listen to, but Drake's from Toronto. There's a few kind of Canadian artists that I would probably take. There's a family that's from Nova Scotia. They're called the Rankins, and a lot of their music is maritime, Eastern music, more folk music kind of stuff. But it reminds me of home and small towns and open air and that kind of stuff. That's
really interesting. Cool. Thank you for sharing that. All right, just imagine you could put a website in your back pocket. What would be one website that you would bring to the lonely island?
Library of Congress.
Good one. That's good.
I so would want to go through the Library of Congress and really read and really look at all the objects they have at the Library of Congress.
That's awesome.
It would take years, but it would be so much.
One app that you would bring?
Ancestry.com, which is so nerdy. But I recently did our DNA stuff.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah. And, it's just fascinating to me. So not totally shocking. I suppose I'm mostly Western and Eastern European by blood.
Mm-hmm.
And what's cool is that there's like this whole 11% Scandinavian. There's no one that I know is really Scandinavian, but they would be fun. So as the DNA stuff, there's another DNA site that's out there, DNA 23 or whatever, about your 23 chromosomes.
Right.
But as we understand more about really how connected we are, where we all come from somewhere and likely have a lot of things in common, I find that just fascinating.
That is an excellent contribution to the show. Thank you, Alicia. Any closing thoughts or advice for the audience, maybe for people that are wanting to go into the nonprofit sector?
I mean, I would just say get involved in your community in any small way that you are able. We all lead busy lives. Find out what your passion is. And whatever that is, whether it's animals or human rights or the environment, there's an organization or people out there that share that same passion, and connect with them either virtually or face-to-face, and get to know an organization, nationally or internationally that you can help support. And whether that's volunteering or donating, do that little bit of good wherever you are, and it makes all of our communities stronger.
Good. And any advice for people that want to go into the Masters of Public Administration program?
Yeah, I mean, I think our master's program is more of a generalist program. So we straddle local government and nonprofit management for our program. So if you're interested in state and federal programs, there are other programs that are out there. We also have a 2-year paid internship. It's the only one that we know of in the country that does that. So we pride ourselves on being able to find jobs right out of the gate, and you're getting paid while you're earning your degree at the same time. So certainly take a look at us. We're trying to support students through as many scholarships as possible. They are competitive. Get up your undergraduate scores as high as possible. The graduate school minimum is a 3.0, and lots of graduate schools are moving to raise that. So your test scores do matter, but so does your passion. We require a personal statement, and really that matters more sometimes than the grades. So explain what you want to do with your life. Not that you have to have everything figured out at 22, because all of us did not have that figured out. But likely you had similar interests, and there's a couple of really good books about looking at kind of what's your story, what's the thread that cuts through your story. And for me, that's probably working with lower income, single women or women with kids, because that's how I grew up, and that's probably where my passions lie, and giving women opportunities so that they don't find themselves in situations where they can't support themselves or their families.
Okay, and where can people find you online, Alicia?
So nonprofitscholar.com is the easiest way to get a hold of me, and all my social media contacts are there, including I just started writing a blog on Google. I think I've only been doing it for a couple of weeks, but every morning I push out a blog just from things that I'm thinking about. It links from my webpage there, and on Facebook, LinkedIn, and then Twitter.
Great. Alicia, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
It's the weekend, and you've carved out 1 hour of your time for me, so I feel very blessed. Thank you so much again, and I will be linking everything that we talked about on the show on the article on my website, and I will be distributing that through social media. So thanks again, Alicia, and I will talk to you later.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jake.
All right, that was episode 4 of the Jake Lawrence podcast. I hope you enjoyed Alicia Schatteman as much as I did. She is a delight. She is very knowledgeable, and she has just a wealth of information in regards to nonprofits, academia, and higher education as well. I hope you enjoyed her story, her journey, and I hope it really does inspire and influence your decision making if you were like me in your 4-year degree, getting your bachelor's, trying to figure out what in the world to do with it. So maybe, just maybe, nonprofit management is the thing for you. So again, give me a couple days, 3-4 days, maybe 5 days, and we'll have on our next speaker, our next guest, another great person, Mr. Eric Engel. He's just a great guy. He is the coordinator for the DuPage Pads in Itasca, and he is a school social worker, and he does some consulting work for the military for the Yellow Ribbon Project as well. So a lot of great things to come. We have a lot of great speakers in the next month. So yeah, try to stay tuned. It's going to be great. Bye-bye.